is only a transition to a different sphere of consciousness. Carol Ann is not like those she's with. She is a living presence in their spiritual earthbound plane.
Hello and welcome to episode 45 of the Talking to the Dead podcast. This week I'm going to be talking about a very different subject from what I'm about to say, and it's going to be something perhaps more in line with all the Talking to the Dead stuff that we've done before. But what I wanted to talk about very, very quickly was that a lot of the things that I have had received from Titan and others in the course of the year that I've been doing this podcast have come true. Things that they've said will happen, or things that they suggested we might want to think about. And I think actually it'll be quite interesting, maybe at the anniversary of this podcast, just to, for the first time for me, to go through all the episodes, because as I've told you before, I never listen to them. I feel very shy about it, this imposter syndrome, but I will go through it and I will see if I can pick out some of the things that have been said and that seem to have come true, and of course equally some of the things perhaps that were said that haven't come true, but that's for another day. But one of the things that happened this week has had a very profound effect on me, so much so that I wanted to start off in this introduction talking about it. So, yes, a number of months ago, I actually managed to channel an entity who claimed that it was our future in, I think, the year 3000 and something. It was a hybrid human AI machine. And I got a lot of feedback from listeners about that. It was very profound and in some ways kind of sad that this is the way we end up, but also perhaps kind of inevitable, certainly the way you're thinking about what people like Elon Musk are doing right now, of implanting chips into people, and the recent media frenzy about the scares of AI and how it's only going to cause harm and danger, and eventually, like a James Cameron movie, take over the world. But yes, there were certain warnings in that episode, I remember. But again, what's happened in the last couple of weeks has really had an effect on me, because I listened to a very interesting interview with Seth Rogen on a podcast, and he was interviewing this chap called David Grusch. Now, those of you who may remember that David Grusch was very big last year because he went in front of the United States Senate and he talked about unidentified aerial phenomenon, or anomalous phenomenon. And there was also this very famous video that got released, I think, first of all by mistake by the Pentagon, and then officially, I think, by the New York Times or the Washington Post. And it showed this, what they called the Tic Tac UFO, from a fighter pilot's perspective in his cockpit, which he'd videoed. And it was doing the most incredible maneuvers, which are unheard of by any aeroplane or vehicle known to man. And this was the best proof, I believe, of a potential unidentified flying object. David Grusch popped up not long after that, and he was a very influential and very senior intelligence officer with the United States government for many years, and he's certainly not lacking in qualifications. You can read about him. He comes across as a very serious, highly intelligent, and self-admitted autistic individual. He's extremely hyper and quite charming in the way that he talks. But the detail that he goes into about what he alleges are government cover-ups of the recovery of crashed, unidentified aerial phenomenon, or UFOs, and also the cover-up of a long-standing engineering program by the public sector and the private sector by going through these crashed vehicles and trying to understand the engineering and seeing if there's anything that can be used in new vehicles or goodness knows what else for the United States government or for private industry. Amazing claims and really quite astonishing. If you don't believe it, that's your prerogative. I happen to listen to this, and it seems to be ticking an awful lot of boxes in the things that I've heard from Titan and others during these podcast episodes. Not only has Titan and others come through in the last year and talked about how probably most of the what we call aliens are probably interdimensional beings that live with us and have always lived with us, but we can't see them because they're on another dimension, or maybe live in oceans, or live underground, or, as I said, live parallel with us, but on a frequency that our eyes and our ears cannot discern. And also, I think in the podcast we had other discussions about the origin of these individuals or these craft. But with David Grusch, he has to be very careful what he says, because he's obviously, he lost his job because he was a whistleblower for the United States government, but he was an ex-analyst with, I think, almost the top level of security clearance. And as a result, he has to be extremely careful still what he puts into the public domain that could come back and haunt him. And he could end up, obviously, in jail. So he says a lot, but he also only hints at things or outright says, I cannot discuss it. He can obviously give a lot of this information to senior members of the government or senior members of the Congress or Senate if he's called to do that in closed sessions, but he can't discuss these things in public. But this interview with Seth Rogen was the nearest I think I've ever heard him hinting or using analogies or using third-person examples, not directly coming from him, of him actually coming out and saying the following. And this is quite amazing to me. And again, if you listen to the previous podcasts, much of this has been said to me. So I do believe it. He indicates that most of these, what we call aliens, are not from other planets per se, but are actually living in fourth dimensional space, or maybe even fifth dimensional space. I'm getting a lot of that, of course. A lot of interdimensional people have come through. A lot of what happens to us after we die happens in an interdimensional space. And he also discusses how, the language that is used cannot necessarily be converted into a language that we can understand. I've had that problem as well, and it ended up being interpreted through music and ideas and feelings. He discussed how most of the recovery of these vehicles has indicated that they are not what you would call spacecraft. They don't have any form of propulsion that's visible. They don't give off any form of heat or any form of signature that would indicate that they fly. They have no flight surfaces, as they call them. And in many cases, they don't seem to even have controls inside them. They're made from often what we would call quite flimsy material, but super strong and super flexible. And, quite a few of them have crashed. And you'd wonder why you'd travel billions of miles across space just to crash in Ohio or Roswell, New Mexico. He kind of answered these questions without even admitting there was a Roswell or even that they actually have that vehicle, but he indicated that they most definitely have a lot of vehicles and they've got them in quite a few bunkers around the United States of America. And they have actively been engineering on them, and they've got whole teams of scientists working on it, from everything from Raytheon to the various top military companies in America, as well as government agencies involving the CIA, the FBI, and others. And he reckons that it's going to come out very soon, because all of this is being put forward by very, very senior people in the military, many of them retired, some of them still active, a lot still very, very frightened to come out and say what they've seen, because they're worried about their pensions or even their personal safety. And Grusch himself was threatened, as was his wife. He talks about that, and his career was kind of almost ruined, but he's become a whistleblower, and he's releasing all this information into the public domain, and he believes that we're very, very, very close to a full disclosure of what the United States government knows and has known for decades, that we are not alone and that we have been visited by these beings. He goes into a little bit of detail about what these beings might be, just in almost a flippant way. I mean, he calls them biologics, but more often than not, they're not biologics as we would understand it. They are living tissue over a computer AI thing. So they're kind of half, this is exactly what I found in 3,000 years, this kind of hybrid human or biological entity AI device, which they're almost like drones that are sent out into space from within intraspace, from within dimensions. They seem to be quite fragile as individuals, but there to gather information or maybe communicate with us. And he says, obviously, there has been frequent communication. There's been an ongoing communication effort, a sharing of things. He doesn't quite say what they're sharing, but there is sharing going on. There are a number of different, if you like, species of these individuals, not just one. And yes, most definitely this is something that has been happening, he says, for thousands of years, and has been interpreted in different ways for thousands of years. So there you are. That, I think, was worth a good 12 minutes of your time. I think I'll put the link down below where you can find David Grusch's interview with Seth Rogen. And also I'll put a link as to where you can find his Congress testimony, where he delivered this testimony with an incredibly authentic and a brilliant sounding ex-commander of I think the Navy pilots and another guy. I mean, very, very respectable top people. These aren't people who are going to lie. They have no reason to lie. They're not selling books, or they're not trying to make money, or these people have seen things that have changed their lives. And they think it's a disgrace, really, that the government has managed to hide this secret. And it's about time we found out that we're not alone. So that's it. Anyway, I am going to ask Titan to come through for the next part of the podcast. So if you give me a few moments when he comes through, I think you'll be very intrigued, I hope, as to the questions I've got to ask him. I'm going to ask him a bit about this, but then I want to ask him about Druidism. So, yes, I did my protection rituals and I've concentrated, and now I know that Titan is here. So Titan, thank you very much for coming through. As you were coming through, very strongly in my head, I sort of heard a voice, and I think it was probably your thoughts, and it was saying, "Be careful what you wish for." And that's a funny phrase to use. Perhaps you could just, tell me a little bit what you mean by that. Titan is saying that he understands how keen I am, and how many people are keen to get that feeling in life that we are not alone, and that maybe in this great big universe that we're aware of, there are other intelligent species of life, or other forms of life, other planets with other technology, and things that perhaps would give us some answers to all the questions that we as humans have been asking almost since we became intelligent in any way or form. But he also says that be careful, because so much of science, so much of religion is fundamentally against the disclosure of information that would be against their formal tenets, either their religions or scientific principles. Obviously, religion over a period of time evolves and develops and adapts to the latest human feelings or the latest human desires. And he's saying such as the Catholic Church may adapt to certain more modern reasonings about things that are allowed or not allowed, or the British Church of England or the Protestant Church has adapted to allowing women priests, for instance. And it's being indicated to me that this is the way that religious organizations tend to develop. And in that regard, my questions about Druids and Druidism, he says, he will answer after this brief portion. Scientists, he says, again, a lot of science has evolved and changed over the years, a lot of understanding of the way things work that have been explained through scientific principles and mathematical equations by great physicists and scientists through the centuries. Many of their ideas, as far as we are concerned, still hold true and are still valid, and some have been found to have been wrong and have been corrected by the latest scientific research. Titan says that but in that particular time when they were invented, they were believed and they were used to explain things. He says, I'm saying be careful what you wish for, because you are trying to explain or trying to understand multidimensional and highly sophisticated entities that are, in your terms, potentially millions of years ahead of you in intelligence and technology. And trying to understand them is really almost a crazy thing to do, because you don't have he says, I don't want to be rude, you just don't have the brain power or the intelligence or the capacity to be able to do that. Even the greatest scientists are going to be completely stumped at some of the most basic stuff that could potentially be revealed by visitors from other dimensions or from other places. And for that reason, you may find that what is being revealed to people who have technology that they've found or have been given through visitation is of such a sophisticated nature that even your best scientists are incapable of understanding it. He's also saying that it is very obvious and it should be obvious to me, that your very best scientists and your very best analysts are not looking at this material because, for whatever reason, and he says he could talk about that a bit, it is not being released generally to the public. Therefore, your progress is somewhat slower, he says. What could be revealed? Do you think there are technologies that could benefit us as a race if we had these technologies, or what do you think, Titan? So no, this comes under the heading, this banner heading of be careful what you wish for. What sort of technologies do you think these people would have that you could benefit from? What technology? Is it going to be weapon technology? Is it going to be flight technology? Is it going to be knowledge of mathematics? Is it going to be understanding the quantum world? Is it going to be understanding interdimensional beings? All of that, again, has its place within the world that these people inhabit. They have developed this technology through, in your terms, billions or millions of years, and that is their technology. Your technology is developing and it's evolving at a timeline that it is supposed to do. There is a tremendous danger circumventing that, he says, by trying to gain technology and knowledge that is really way beyond the particular needs of society that you now live in. And again, as you've seen with many things, in the wrong hands, it might end up causing an awful lot of damage, distress, death, or worse to the planet. And for that reason, most of the information that's been offered to us through governmental agencies or through the finding of various devices, he says. Some of them are not crashed, as you say. They've been described as being crashed. Some of the information has been put there on purpose and has always been put there on purpose to us, to give us a sort of, he's saying, a sort of a head start in various directions. And this has happened through, we've discussed this before, he says, through creativity, through people getting ideas, through scientists getting inspiration, through music, through art. That communication has already been happening. So physical communication through finding of objects or the sharing of physical technology is something that has limited use to the human species because of the huge sophistication that it has. Be careful what you wish for. What do we wish? What do you wish to have from all of this stuff? Okay, you mentioned that. What about this David Grusch or many other people who claim that they have seen vehicles or have worked on vehicles or have had access to this or have read that they recovered bodies and all of that? Titan says that thoughts create reality. There is reality. There is thinking. There is wishing. Some of it is true. Some of it is not. You've got to be careful because there is a lot of fake news out there. A lot of what is being claimed to have been discovered or seen or heard about is fake. There is a big business in that, but there is also, he calls it social agitation, where people are trying to deliberately agitate those in power in order to be able to see what comes. Maybe if they push them hard enough, some secrets will pop out, but maybe there are no secrets there to be revealed. And it's just what I think we call a fishing expedition. But again, be careful what you wish for, because the release of information might release information that you hadn't expected. And it might not even be related to what you were wanting to seek. So be very careful, he says, about wanting information revelations. He's saying that we've had discussions before and people have come through. It's true. Interdimensional beings, beings in our future, which are a hybrid of humanity and machine. That is the technical explanation for most of what we are seeing. Titan is saying that if you really get that information, and that information is really released, you will find that so much of what is being seen and what is being discovered is not physical in your sense. It's almost like a dream. It's almost I'm saying the word hologram, a hologram of things. It's a projection of stuff. There is nothing physical. It's actually appears to be physical. It can be seen if you're in the right circumstance. It can appear to interact with radars or with monitoring equipment. But in fact, it's not actually there. It's not physically there in the same sense as, say, another aircraft would be there, or an aircraft would be flying over you. These vehicles tend to drift in and drift out of our three-dimensional reality. And some people can see them, some people cannot see them. As far as remnants and stuff that's been found physically, most of that will be deliberately sent as a physical probe to our planet to gather information and to send it back. And in that respect, yes, there were some very famous incidents of that, Titan is saying, and much of what you've heard is completely true. And certainly there are exotic materials that have been found and all sorts of remnants of this material. But in many cases, it is of a sophistication that is so enormous that it's pretty useless to you. It's honestly, he says, it's like handing you a rock and saying, there you are. And what has that done for you? You've got a rock. And you think, well, this is the most sophisticated thing that I've ever seen, or is it just a rock? Well, to you, it'll look just like a rock. But in the hands of the people who designed it and built it and thought it up and sent it, either through time and space or through dimensions, it is highly sophisticated, information-bearing, transporting, and everything that you could possibly imagine. But to you, it looks just like a rock because you don't understand it. Titan says that the reason why American society is always talked about is that it is quite an open society, but these things have been happening in all societies and for many, many thousands of years, and often they're not revealed to the general public because there is either because they don't understand it themselves and don't quite know how to portray that information, or are frightened, perhaps, that the information can have such a disastrous effect on people's minds. He's saying that there really is a psychological problem providing our species with information that would be, even 100 years ahead of what you are now capable of doing. But to provide a species like ours with information that's thousands or even millions of years in advance of the technology or the understandings that we have, would cause a dislocation of your senses. It would cause almost a split in your mind, a fracture in your belief that could cause huge psychological damage. And so the governments who have had access to some of this information and have understood some of it at a very, very low level struggle to think how that can be explained by the population as a whole and what potential damage, and this is, he's saying, be careful what you wish for, what massive potential damage can be done to society by releasing information like that, where even the people who are releasing it do not understand, even a fraction of what they have found. Okay, I do understand. I can see that would be a huge risk. But Titan is saying, David Grusch and others are most definitely on a forward momentum, and without any doubt, in the next year or two, finally it will be revealed to humanity that humanity is not alone on this planet and has never been alone on this planet, as the scientists begin to understand quite where it is residing or how it is and how people have been interacting with it, and to try to release some of that information in a very controlled way without getting people to have to question their whole existence. All right, enough of that. The second thing I want to talk to you about is my friend Linda in Germany, who asked me a few weeks ago if I could ask you about Druids. And I suppose now I'm realizing, as usual, that all of this is somehow related. Can you please explain to me about Druids? I know a little bit about Druids, but not much. How are Druids related to aliens or UAPs or any of this technology or science that is going to be revealed to us? Titan says that throughout human history, those people who have knowledge have had power, we know that, and those people who have extraordinary knowledge tend to have extraordinary power. And there have been, in every society, people who have considered themselves to have that knowledge that others do not have. And usually that knowledge of the communication with the dead, or understanding what happens after death, being able to predict the future. These things have been massively required by people in power for thousands of years. She's reminding me now of this film I saw the other day, the Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton film Cleopatra. And in that film, in Egyptian times, Cleopatra was consulting psychics and how would things turn out and what would happen to the Roman Empire and what would happen to her children. And Titan is saying, yes, just that. I mean, for thousands of years, people have turned to people who've claimed, rightly or wrongly, that they can tell the future. But more importantly to the idea of being a druid, the power came with druids because people needed to know with some predictability how things would happen, because they were living in a world thousands of years ago that seemed to be really at the mercy of nature in all its ways. She says that the sailors were very fearful of sea monsters, and they were fearful of the wind and the waves and potentially dying. People who were living and producing food were fearful of the weather and, would it ruin their harvest, and how much harvest would they have? People who went to war would fear death, or they would fear loss. They would fear that others were stronger or had better weapons than them. And people who were of a religious frame of mind, when people were dying or people were being born, or they were having experiences that they couldn't explain, would look again to people to try to explain that to them, to make them try to understand, what is happening, how the world works, why does the sun go up and down, and how do the planets move, and what are stars, and all the technology that humans to a certain extent know, was totally unknown in those days. And so those who did say that they could understand it or tried to explain it ended up having very important roles in society. And again, she says this has happened for thousands of years. The Druids are just another example of a very educated class. She says you won't find really anything about them anymore, because everything they did was in ceremony, in a ceremonial way. It was in a very primitive way, without writing and record. And people would learn the traditions and the various spells, she says, or incantations, or the way that they would talk to nature, and the way they would use that in order to try to influence all the things that they were fearful of or misunderstanding of, such as how to survive journeys on the ocean, and how to feel comfort in war, and how to reconcile yourself to the dying and the dead and those being born, and what would happen after. And all of these answers were interpreted by masters who spent many years learning to do that, and were given very privileged positions in society, and were often given the best food, the best accommodation, the best clothes. They were given money, and in many respects they didn't have to do the physical work excuse me, of ordinary people. Quite often they didn't have to pay taxes. They weren't persecuted even by invading armies, such as she's mentioning the Romans again. They were given tremendous respect, for many, many years, Druids as a particular form of this was very, very successful and survived. Druids were just the natural evolution of mankind and learning to try to understand the world around him. And of course, that world was a very physical world. It was a very outdoors world. It was based on trees, wind. It was based on fear and love. And it was based on the growing of food and the harvesting of food. And the Druids taught that people could influence this for the betterment through sacrifices of food or sacrifices of humans or animals. They had a whole religious doctrine that was created that they believed if it was followed, it could influence the world around them. Not just so they could understand the world around them, but physically change the world around them. And of course it worked, Titan is saying, because thoughts create reality. And if enough people believed in it and followed it, and certainly enough people did, it had physical, tangible effects on their lives and on the world around it. But finally, with Druidism, it largely fell out of use, mainly because conquering armies, and whether it was the Romans or the Greeks or any of the great societies in the past, Christianity, of course, ended up making Druidism superfluous and unneeded, because these other great forms of explanation for the world took precedence. And that is, Titan says, the normality of the human experience. It's the normal progression. It's, as she said at the beginning, what happens to all things in our society is that we learn and we develop and we do new things and we find new ways of doing things and we have new explanations for how they are. And so in that respect, you could say the same happened to the Druids, that they had to be careful what they wished for. They wished for a world of control of nature and harmony with nature. They wished to increasingly turn their back on the way the world was becoming and the order that was being imposed on them. But eventually they could not fight the march of progress. And lastly, she's saying that there is a modern form of Druidism that's been happening for the last few hundred years, which is totally unrelated to what was happening at the very beginning of mankind. But that is very romantic, and it's a lovely and a very righteous way to live, Titan says, and it's a shield, if you like, that has people put up in order to try to fend off what their believers think is some of the worst elements of modern life, of modern science, modern technology. It's a way of trying, as they believe, to get to a more spiritual and a more religious, because some of them still are religious, way of life. Thank you very much, Titan. Yes, I can certainly myself see the attraction of a lifestyle like that. I suppose so many people I know are suffering from burnout, and I think so many people are very suspicious of everything from COVID vaccinations to pharmaceuticals or psychology or any number of things. The fear people have of AI and everything you've just discussed about people fearing of what governments may be hiding. I can really understand, yes. I think probably being a Druid in the modern world must be almost like a meditation and a way of trying to lead a simpler, more honest, more spiritual life. So there cannot be any great harm in that, I wouldn't have thought. So there we are. So Linda, I hope that gave you some insight. I think it's fantastic, and I love, as usual, how all of this seems to link with everything else. We're talking about a society of people thousands of years ago who had some sort of spiritual knowledge and had the ability perhaps to heal or to tell the future, and would have a tremendous influence on people's lives and help people understand what must have seemed to be almost inexplicable, particularly in sort of Iron Age minds and then Roman minds and throughout history when science was just so little understood. But yes, I take away from this episode, although I have a tremendous interest in all these things, I suppose be careful. How much knowledge do you really want to have? And I think that's come through before. With knowledge doesn't necessarily come power. With knowledge comes responsibility, and also maybe a certain amount of worry. And sometimes maybe it's a good idea just not to watch the news. Thank you.